The morning of the audition, the young pianist felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that made her stomach twist in knots. She had been waiting for this opportunity for months, ever since she had heard about the chance to play at one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. She had practiced every day, sometimes for hours, until her fingers hurt and her arms ached. The piano at home had become her closest companion, a place where she could pour all her emotions into every note. Today, though, she had to bring all that private passion into a room full of strangers who might not even understand her. The building where the audition was being held was large and imposing, with tall glass doors that reflected the morning sun. When she stepped inside, the echo of her shoes against the polished floor made her heart race even faster. Other students were already there, chatting in small groups, laughing, and showing off their expensive instruments. Some of them had tuxedos or elegant dresses, carrying themselves with the kind of confidence that made the young pianist feel small and uncertain. She gripped the straps of her bag tightly and reminded herself that talent wasn't about appearances. She had music in her heart, and that was enough. When it was finally her turn, she was led into a bright room with a grand piano that looked almost too perfect to touch. The judges sat at a long table, their faces serious and unreadable. She noticed a few students in the waiting area glance at her with smirks and whispered comments, and for a moment, doubt crept in. She tried to shake it off, taking a deep breath and walking to the piano. The keys felt cool under her fingers, and she closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself. This was her world, and here, the opinions of others could not reach her. She began to play. At first, the notes were soft, almost hesitant, as if testing the waters. But gradually, she let herself feel the music, and her fingers moved with more confidence, carrying emotion into each chord. The room seemed to fade away. She could hear the music as if it were speaking for her, telling her story of years spent practicing alone in a small room, of evenings when she had pushed herself to keep going even when she was tired or frustrated. Each note was a piece of herself, laid bare for anyone willing to listen. But not everyone was listening with open hearts. She noticed a few students whispering to each other, glancing at her with raised eyebrows or barely concealed laughter. It stung, but she refused to let it break her concentration. Instead, she poured more of herself into the performance, letting the music flow naturally. Her fingers danced across the keys with precision and feeling, creating a melody that was both gentle and powerful, delicate yet full of depth. The room, once filled with doubt and judgment, seemed to bend to the rhythm of her music. She had practiced this piece countless times, but today it felt different. Each time she played a passage, she could feel the story behind it, a story of struggle, hope, and the quiet determination to keep moving forward no matter what others said. She remembered all the late nights spent alone, the sacrifices, and the unwavering belief that her music mattered. In that moment, she realized that the audition was not just about impressing the judges. It was about proving to herself that her voice, to the piano, had the power to reach others. As she played the final notes, the room was silent for a moment. The echo of the last chord lingered in the air, filling the space with a sense of completion and calm. She opened her eyes, expecting a reaction, maybe polite applause, maybe nods of approval. Instead, she caught the faint smirks of some students who had doubted her, their laughter quiet but noticeable. A knot formed in her stomach, but she did not let it show on her face. She stood, nodded politely to the judges, and walked out of the room, her head held high despite the ache in her chest. Out in the hallway, she leaned against the wall, letting out a slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The feelings of embarrassment and frustration swirled within her, but beneath them was a spark of pride. She had given everything she had, played with honesty, and faced the judgment of others without faltering. She reminded herself that the opinions of people who did not understand her music could not diminish her passion or her dedication. While she waited for the next round, she wandered to a quiet corner of the building, where the soft hum of distant conversations could be heard. She watched as other students practiced scales and arpeggios, their fingers moving with confidence that came from years of training and support. It was easy to feel small in comparison, but she focused on the music in her heart instead of the skill of others. Each mistake she had made during her performance was a lesson, not a failure. Each note that had resonated perfectly was proof of her potential. She thought of her teacher back home, who had always believed in her even when others doubted her abilities. The words of encouragement echoed in her mind, reminding her that talent is only part of the journey. Perseverance, courage, and authenticity matter just as much. The young pianist closed her eyes, imagining the piano at home, where every key knew her touch, every chord knew her soul. She felt a quiet determination settle in her chest. She would not let ridicule or laughter define her. She had come this far, and she would go even further. Minutes later, she was called to the side by a staff member who told her that she could take a short break before the next group of auditions began. She nodded and walked toward the waiting area, where the other students were talking and laughing. Some still glanced her way, their expressions unreadable. She kept her gaze forward, focusing on the music that lived inside her. There was a rhythm to her heartbeat, a melody that no one could mock or diminish. She had discovered that true strength came from within, from the courage to stand and play even when the world seemed against her. As she sat down and gently rested her hands on her lap, she replayed the performance in her mind. She could hear each note, feel each movement, and remember the emotion that had guided her fingers. The memory of the smirks and laughter was there, but it felt distant, less powerful than the music she had created. She understood, even in that moment, that the opinion of others was temporary, but the music she had nurtured over years of practice was permanent. It was her story, her voice, and her truth. Time passed slowly, and she noticed other students finishing their performances. Some left the room with confident smiles, while others looked uncertain, just as she had felt. In the quiet moments between auditions, she felt a sense of connection to all of them. They were all striving, all hoping to be seen and heard, and yet, she knew that what set her apart was not just skill or technique, but the sincerity of her heart. Music was not a competition to her. It was a way to speak without words, to express what she could not say in any other way. Eventually, she was called back into the room for a short feedback session with the judges. Their faces were still serious, but there was a hint of curiosity in their eyes. She listened carefully as they discussed her performance, noting both the strengths and the areas where she could improve. She took their words in stride, knowing that criticism was a tool for growth, not a reflection of her worth. With a calm nod, she thanked them and walked out once again, feeling lighter than before. The weight of judgment had lessened, replaced by a quiet confidence that came from staying true to herself. As she left the building that morning, the sunlight felt warmer, brighter, almost as if it were welcoming her back into the world. She carried herself with a newfound sense of pride, knowing that she had faced ridicule and still chosen to play, to express, and to remain true to her passion. The journey ahead was uncertain, but she was ready. She had learned that music was not just about impressing others, it was about touching hearts, including her own, and nothing could take that away. After the audition, the young pianist walked slowly down the quiet streets surrounding the music school. The laughter and whispers from the audition room still echoed in her mind, making her chest feel heavy. She had expected nerves, of course, but she had not expected the sting of ridicule to cut so sharply. People had laughed at her while she played, as if the music she had poured her heart into meant nothing. She kept telling herself that she should not care, that her music was for herself first, but the words felt hollow. The world outside the building seemed louder, as if the city itself were mocking her attempts to find her place. She found a small park nearby and sat on a wooden bench beneath a large oak tree. The cold metal of the bench seeped into her fingers, grounding her in reality. The young pianist closed her eyes, letting the wind brush against her cheeks. In the stillness, she tried to breathe away the shame and frustration. She thought about every practice session she had ever had, the long evenings spent perfecting scales, the hours repeating pieces until her fingers ached, the sacrifices she and her family had made to support her music. Was it all going to be overshadowed by a few cruel comments from strangers? As she sat there, lost in her thoughts, she noticed an elderly man walking slowly along the path. His steps were deliberate, almost unhurried, and he carried a small notebook under his arm. When he noticed her sitting alone, he paused and smiled gently. "You look like someone carrying a heavy load," he said softly. The young pianist hesitated, then nodded. She did not know this man, and yet there was something comforting in the way he spoke. "Music is not easy," the man continued, "especially when people do not understand what you are trying to say. But do not let their voices drown out your own." She looked at him, curiosity mingling with skepticism. I tried to play my best, but they laughed," she admitted quietly. The old man nodded knowingly. "I have seen many young people like you. They play from the heart, and others cannot see it. That does not mean it is worthless. It means it is real." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small notebook, showing her a page filled with music notes written in careful handwriting. Every note matters if it is honest. Every melody tells a story, even if the world is not ready to hear it yet. She felt a flicker of warmth inside her chest. The words were simple, but they carried a weight she had not felt before. She thought of her teacher back home, who had always reminded her that music was more than competition, that it was expression, connection, and honesty. Perhaps she had been so focused on impressing the judges that she had forgotten why she loved to play in the first place. Her fingers tingled as if recalling the touch of the piano keys, the familiar sensation that made her heart beat faster. The young pianist took a deep breath and tried to shift her perspective. The ridicule of a few students, the judgment of the judges, none of it could erase the years of dedication she had put into her craft. She remembered the small moments that had shaped her, like the first time she had mastered a difficult piece, the look of pride on her teacher's face when she had performed for a small audience, and the quiet satisfaction of creating music that moved her own heart. Those moments mattered more than any laughter or doubt. Encouraged by the old man's words, she decided to go back to the school later that day to watch the remaining auditions. Even though she would not be performing again, she wanted to see how others played, how they expressed themselves, and perhaps learn something new. Sitting in the corner of the practice hall, she observed students who were confident and polished, but she also noticed moments where they hesitated, where their emotions did not fully reach the keys. It was a reminder that every musician had their struggles, even those who appeared perfect on the surface. After the auditions, she wandered through a nearby cafe, ordering a simple drink and finding a quiet table by the window. She watched people pass by, lost in their own worlds, and allowed herself to reflect on the morning. Slowly, she realized that the ridicule she had experienced, while painful, was not the end of her journey. It was a challenge, a test of her resilience and dedication. She had chosen music as her path, and every great path had obstacles. In the days that followed, she returned home with a renewed sense of purpose. She practiced with a focus she had not felt before, paying attention not just to the technical perfection of each note, but to the emotion behind it. She imagined the eyes of the people who had laughed, not as a source of shame, but as a reminder that her music had the power to move, to silence, to change perceptions. Each day, her confidence grew, and she realized that the greatest audience she had to impress was not the one in the audition room, but the one within herself. She also reached out to her teacher, sharing every detail of the experience. Her teacher listened patiently, offering guidance, encouragement, and practical advice on how to strengthen her performance. They worked on dynamics, phrasing, and interpretation, turning the humiliation of the audition into a fuel for growth. The young pianist felt grateful for this support, understanding that success was not achieved alone, but with the help of those who believed in her. Night after night, she practiced in her small room, the soft glow of the lamp illuminating the piano keys. She played pieces that challenged her, pushed her to her limits, and allowed her to explore emotions she had not yet expressed fully. The music became a refuge, a place where she could be herself without fear of judgment. She began to notice subtle improvements. Her timing became more precise, her touch more sensitive, her expression more nuanced. Each small victory reinforced her belief in her own abilities. She also began to listen to recordings of famous pianists, analyzing their techniques and interpretations, not to imitate them, but to understand how they conveyed emotion and storytelling through music. She noticed that even the greatest performers faced criticism and doubt in their early days. Knowing this, she felt less isolated in her struggles and more connected to a larger community of musicians who shared her passion and perseverance. The young pianist started to write down her thoughts and feelings about music, creating a journal that blended technical notes with personal reflections. She documented her emotions before and after each practice session, noting what worked, what needed improvement, and how she felt about each piece. This process helped her gain clarity, giving structure to the sometimes chaotic flood of thoughts and feelings that accompanied her dedication to the piano. One evening, as she played a particularly challenging piece, she realized how far she had come. The music flowed effortlessly, each note resonating with clarity and emotion. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction and pride. The ridicule she had faced no longer had the power to hurt her. It had become a stepping stone that led to growth and resilience. She understood that talent alone was not enough. Courage, perseverance, and a willingness to learn were equally important. Her confidence grew to the point where she decided to share her music with a small group of friends and family. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with tears and smiles that touched her deeply. It was in these intimate performances that she realized the true impact of her music, the ability to connect, to communicate, and to inspire. The experience reinforced her commitment to continue her journey, not for recognition or approval, but for the joy and fulfillment that music brought to her life and the lives of others. By the end of this period, the young pianist had transformed her initial shame and doubt into determination and growth. She had faced ridicule and emerged stronger, more focused, and more in love with her craft than ever before. The world outside the music room still had its critics, but she had discovered a voice within herself that no one could silence. She was ready to continue her journey, to face whatever challenges lay ahead, and to let her music speak louder than any laughter or doubt. Weeks had passed since the audition, and the young pianist waited anxiously for the results. Every day felt longer than the last, each one stretching her patience thin as she wondered whether her effort had been enough. She continued to practice diligently, reminding herself that her music was valuable even if no one else saw it. Still, there was a quiet hope inside her, a small spark that refused to be extinguished, telling her that her perseverance might soon bear fruit. One afternoon, she received a letter from the music school. Her hands trembled as she carefully opened it, the envelope feeling heavier than it should. As she unfolded the paper, her eyes scanned the words quickly, almost afraid of what she might find. Then she saw her name listed among the accepted students. Relief and joy surged through her body, mingling with disbelief. She had done it. The doubts, the ridicule, the sleepless nights it had all led to this moment. She felt a mixture of pride and amazement, realizing that her dedication and courage had been recognized. She could not wait to share the news with her family and teacher, who had supported her every step of the way. When she called her teacher, the voice on the other end was filled with warmth and excitement. Her teacher reminded her that this was only the beginning, and that the real journey had just started. They spoke for a long time, discussing what lay ahead, how she could continue to grow, and the importance of staying true to her music despite external pressures. The young pianist felt strengthened by this conversation, inspired to embrace the challenges that awaited her as she prepared to join the music school. She began to notice subtle changes in the people around her. Some students who had previously laughed at her during the audition now regarded her with curiosity, their expressions tinged with respect, even though some of their glances were hesitant. She realized that success did not mean seeking approval from others. Her focus remained on her music, on the journey she had committed herself to, and the satisfaction she derived from every note she played. Arriving at the school for her first day, she felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. The campus was larger than she had imagined, with grand buildings and corridors that echoed with the sound of footsteps and piano melodies. She walked into the practice rooms, where students were already immersed in their music, and felt a sense of belonging she had not anticipated. This was a place where her dedication and passion could thrive, where talent was nurtured and growth was encouraged. Her first lessons at the school were both challenging and inspiring. The instructors pushed her to explore techniques she had not yet mastered, and to express emotions through music with greater depth. At first, she struggled to keep up with some of the advanced exercises, but she reminded herself that progress took time. Each small improvement was a victory, a step toward becoming the musician she aspired to be. The rigorous schedule demanded discipline, yet she welcomed it, knowing that her efforts would shape her skills and character. Over the weeks, she began to form connections with her fellow students. Some were supportive, offering guidance and sharing their own experiences of overcoming challenges. Others remained competitive, testing her patience and resolve. She learned to navigate this environment with grace, recognizing that each person's journey was unique. The young pianist discovered that collaboration and mutual encouragement often brought more growth than rivalry and judgment. She focused on learning from those around her while maintaining her individuality and personal style. One day, the school announced a student recital that would feature performers of exceptional talent. The young pianist's heart raced at the idea of performing in front of an audience once again, recalling the emotions of the audition. This time, however, she felt more prepared, more confident in her abilities. She knew that her music carried the weight of her dedication and her personal story, and that authenticity would resonate more than mere technical skill. In the days leading up to the recital, she practiced relentlessly, refining every piece with meticulous attention. She experimented with dynamics, tempo, and phrasing, seeking ways to convey the deepest emotions through her performance. Each session left her physically exhausted, but mentally invigorated, as if every note she played added to her sense of purpose and fulfillment. She began to feel a quiet excitement, anticipating the moment when her music would reach an audience once more. When the day of the recital arrived, the young pianist felt a mixture of excitement and nerves. The hall was filled with students, instructors, and family members, all eager to witness the performances. As she waited backstage, she reflected on her journey, the challenges she had faced, the ridicule she had endured, and the resilience that had brought her to this point. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath and centering herself, ready to let her music speak. Stepping onto the stage, she felt a wave of calm wash over her. The bright lights and attentive audience no longer intimidated her. Instead, they became part of the experience, amplifying the connection between her music and the listeners. She seated herself at the piano, her fingers poised over the keys, and began to play. The notes flowed naturally, each one carrying emotion and storytelling, weaving together a tapestry of sound that captivated the audience. The young pianist felt completely immersed in the music, as if nothing else existed beyond the keys and the melodies she created. The audience listened in rapt attention, drawn into the depth and sincerity of her performance. Even those who had once doubted her could not ignore the power and emotion in her playing. She poured every ounce of experience, every lesson learned, into the music, transforming nerves and anticipation into energy and expression. The performance was not flawless in a mechanical sense, but it was authentic, moving, and unforgettable. As she reached the final chord, the hall remained silent for a brief, suspended moment, absorbing the impact of her music. Then, a wave of applause erupted, filling the space with sound and energy. The young pianist felt a rush of relief and pride, tears threatening to spill as she bowed to the audience. For the first time, she truly understood the impact of her dedication, the power of resilience, and the joy of sharing her music with others. Backstage, her peers approached her with admiration, some offering congratulations, others expressing surprise at the depth and emotion of her performance. She responded with humility, recognizing that the journey was ongoing and that each step forward was part of a larger path. Her teacher, watching from the wings, smiled knowingly, proud of the growth and courage the young pianist had demonstrated. That evening, as she walked home, the city lights reflected on the wet pavement, casting long, shimmering reflections. She thought about the audition that had begun this journey, the laughter, the doubt, the fear, and realized how far she had come. Each challenge, each moment of uncertainty, had shaped her into a stronger, more confident musician. She understood that success was not just about recognition or approval, but about staying true to her passion and letting her music reflect her heart. Over the following weeks, the young pianist continued to practice and perform, each experience reinforcing her dedication and love for music. She discovered new layers of expression and began composing small pieces of her own. Inspired by the journey she had undertaken, her confidence grew, but she remained grounded, aware that every performance was an opportunity to learn and connect. She carried with her the lessons learned from ridicule, perseverance, and self-belief, knowing that these would guide her through future challenges and triumphs. By the end of this period, the young pianist had evolved into a musician with both skill and heart. The experiences of the audition, the waiting, the ridicule, and the triumph of acceptance had shaped her not only as a performer, but as a person. She understood that music was more than notes and technique. It was expression, resilience, and connection. She had learned that while others' opinions might sting, the true measure of her worth lay in her dedication, authenticity, and love for her craft. The journey was far from over, but she faced it with courage, ready to embrace every note, every challenge, and every opportunity to let her music shine. Months had passed since the young pianist had joined the music school, and she had grown in ways she never imagined. Her confidence had increased, not just because of her improving skills, but because she had learned to trust herself and her instincts. Every day, she played, studied, and practiced, allowing her music to evolve naturally. It was during this time that the school announced a major recital performance that would feature the most promising students. The young pianist felt a mixture of excitement and nerves. This was her moment to show not only her technical skill, but the depth of emotion she could convey through music. The weeks leading up to the recital were filled with preparation. The young pianist spent hours each day at the piano, refining every detail of her chosen pieces. She experimented with tempo, dynamics, and phrasing, aiming to communicate the story and emotion behind each note. She also paid close attention to posture and hand movements, understanding that every small gesture contributed to the overall impression of her performance. She was determined to be prepared in every possible way, not to impress anyone, but to give her music the full attention it deserved. As the day of the recital approached, the the young pianist felt a growing sense of anticipation. She knew that the audience would include students, teachers, and even families who had come to see the best performances. Among them would be those who had once doubted her abilities, and she realized that her performance could not only showcase her skill, but also the resilience she had developed since the audition. She felt a quiet determination to focus on the music, rather than on the reactions of the crowd. On the evening of the recital, the hall was filled with people, their eyes focused on the stage. The young pianist waited backstage, listening to the applause for the performers who had gone before her. Her heart raced, but she reminded herself to breathe deeply and focus on the music she loved. She thought about all the hours she had spent practicing alone, the mistakes that had taught her lessons, and the encouragement she had received from her teacher. She carried all of that experience with her, knowing it had shaped her into the musician she was becoming. When it was her turn, she walked onto the stage and approached the piano. The bright lights were warm, the audience silent, and the room seemed to hold its breath. She seated herself and took a moment to place her fingers on the keys. The familiar feel of the piano under her hands brought a sense of comfort and confidence. She began to play, letting her emotions guide her fingers. Each note flowed naturally, rising and falling with the story she wanted to tell. The audience was immediately drawn in by the authenticity of her performance. The music carried emotion that transcended words, touching the hearts of those listening. Even students who had once mocked her were silent, their surprise evident as they listened. The young pianist played with precision and passion, allowing herself to be fully present in the moment. She let her music speak for her, expressing feelings she could not put into words. Throughout the performance, she felt a sense of connection with the audience. Every crescendo, every delicate note, seemed to resonate not just in the room but within herself. She had learned that music was not just about technical perfection. It was about conveying emotion, telling a story, and touching others. The applause she had longed for was not her goal. Her goal was to communicate, to share, and to express everything she had learned and experienced. As she reached the final notes, the young pianist felt a surge of emotion. The music ended, leaving a moment of silence in the hall. Then, a wave of applause erupted, louder and more heartfelt than she could have imagined. She stood and bowed, her heart full of gratitude and pride. The applause continued as she looked around the audience, noticing the expressions of amazement and admiration on the faces of those who had doubted her. It was a moment of triumph, not just for her skill, but for her perseverance and courage. After the recital, the young pianist was approached by fellow students, teachers, and even strangers who had been moved by her performance. They complimented her technique, her expression, and the emotional depth of her music. She listened humbly, grateful for their recognition. But she knew that the true reward was the satisfaction of having played her heart out, of having transformed her challenges into a performance that resonated with others. That evening, as she walked home, the young pianist reflected on how far she had come. She thought about the audition, the ridicule, the long hours of practice, and the support she had received from her teacher and loved ones. Every challenge, every moment of doubt, had been a part of her growth. She realized that the journey was ongoing, but she felt stronger and more capable than ever. She had learned to face criticism with grace, to use doubt as motivation, and to trust in her own abilities. In the days that followed, the young pianist continued to practice and explore new pieces. She began to compose her own music, inspired by the experiences and emotions she had encountered on her journey. Her performances became more confident and expressive, each one a reflection of her growth and dedication. She discovered that sharing her music brought joy not only to herself but to others, and that the connection she created through music was more powerful than any judgment or ridicule. The young pianist also began to mentor younger students, sharing her experiences and encouraging them to pursue their passions with dedication and courage. She emphasized the importance of perseverance, of focusing on personal growth rather than comparison, and of expressing oneself authentically through music. Her story became an inspiration to others, a reminder that resilience, hard work, and passion could overcome doubt and criticism. Through these experiences, the young pianist realized that true success was not defined by accolades or recognition alone, but by the journey, the dedication, and the impact of her music on herself and others. She embraced the challenges and opportunities that came her way, knowing that each performance, each lesson, and each moment of growth was a step forward on her path as a musician. By the end of this chapter in her life, the young pianist had transformed from a nervous and uncertain student into a confident and expressive musician. She had faced ridicule, overcome doubt, and demonstrated the power of perseverance and authenticity. Her music had the ability to move, inspire, and connect, and she understood that this was the true essence of her journey. She was ready to continue, to explore new horizons, and to let her music shine in ways she had never imagined. The young pianist had never felt such a mix of emotions in her life. After the recital, her confidence had grown tremendously, but she knew that her journey was far from over. She returned home that evening feeling a sense of peace, yet an excitement for the future that pulsed in her chest. She reflected on how much she had changed from the nervous, uncertain girl who had faced ridicule at her audition to the poised, expressive musician she had become. She realized that every challenge, every doubt, every long practice session had prepared her for moments like these. Over the next few weeks, the school announced that several students would have the chance to perform at a national-level competition. The young pianist's name was among those selected. At first, she was overwhelmed by the news. The thought of performing on a larger stage in front of a new audience, some of whom might be critical or dismissive, made her heart race. But then she remembered all she had overcome: the laughter, the judgment, the long nights of practice, and she understood that she was ready. She had learned to trust her music, her emotions, and her abilities. Preparing for the national competition demanded even more focus and dedication. She spent hours each day refining her technique, polishing every note, and ensuring that her interpretation of each piece reflected the depth of her emotions. She experimented with tempo and dynamics, seeking ways to make her performance unique and moving. Every evening, she would play in front of a small mirror, imagining an audience and observing how her expressions and movements complemented the music. She wanted to make sure that when she performed, her entire presence, her posture, gestures, and emotion spoke as loudly as her notes. Despite the rigorous preparation, she found moments of doubt creeping in. Memories of the ridicule at her first audition occasionally resurfaced, and she wondered whether she would be able to impress such an important audience. But each time doubt appeared, she reminded herself that music was her expression, her story, and her voice. The opinions of others could not diminish the years of dedication, practice, and passion she had poured into her craft. She focused on her love for the piano, and slowly, the anxiety began to transform into excitement. The day of the competition arrived. The young pianist entered the grand hall, where the air was thick with anticipation and the scent of polished wood. Musicians from all over the country were warming up, their fingers moving gracefully across the keys, their eyes focused on their music sheets. The young pianist found a quiet corner and practiced her breathing, feeling the familiar touch of the keys beneath her fingers as if they were an extension of herself. The hours of preparation, the lessons, and the practice sessions converged in that moment, filling her with a quiet strength. When it was her turn to perform, she walked to the stage with a calmness that surprised her. The bright lights reflected off the polished floor, and the audience waited in silence. She seated herself at the piano, closed her eyes briefly, and let herself feel the music before her fingers touched the keys. She began to play, and immediately, the hall seemed to transform. The notes carried emotion, depth, and nuance, telling a story without words. She played with a fluidity and confidence that reflected her growth, and the audience was drawn in by the sincerity of her performance. As she continued, she noticed some of the attendees leaning forward, captivated by the story unfolding through her music. Even those who had come with critical eyes found themselves absorbed by the melodies, unable to ignore the passion and dedication evident in each note. The young pianist felt a sense of freedom as she played, as if the music had become an extension of her soul. Every emotion she had experienced, the frustration of ridicule, the joy of progress, the pride in her achievements, flowed through her hands and into the piano. The final chord resonated through the hall, lingering in the air like a breath held by the audience. For a moment, there was silence, and the young pianist felt her heart pounding in anticipation. Then, a wave of applause erupted, filling the hall with sound and energy. She stood and bowed, tears threatening to spill as the audience continued to applaud. She had faced judgment, ridicule, and doubt, and now she had transformed those experiences into music that touched people's hearts. The applause was not just for her skill, but for her courage, her resilience, and her authenticity. After the performance, she was approached by judges, teachers, and fellow musicians who expressed their admiration for her technique, expression, and ability to connect with the audience. Some asked questions about her approach to music, her practice routine, and how she had developed such depth of expression at a young age. She answered humbly, sharing insights while emphasizing the importance of dedication, perseverance, and staying true to oneself. The young pianist realized that her journey was becoming an inspiration for others, just as she had once been inspired by her teacher and mentors. In the following days, the young pianist reflected on her journey. She thought about the audition where she had been ridiculed, the long hours of practice, the lessons learned, and the recitals that had shaped her into the musician she had become. She understood that success was not only about recognition, awards, or applause. It was about growth, resilience, and the courage to keep moving forward despite challenges. She felt gratitude for every experience, every person who had supported her, and even those who had doubted her, for they had unknowingly strengthened her resolve. The young pianist continued to compose and practice, exploring new pieces and experimenting with her own music. She began to mentor other students, sharing her experiences and encouraging them to pursue their passions with determination and authenticity. She emphasized that the true measure of a musician was not just skill, but the ability to convey emotion, to connect with others, and to remain dedicated even when faced with doubt or criticism. Through her guidance, other students found inspiration and motivation, realizing that perseverance and authenticity were key to their own growth. As time went on, the young pianist's performances became more confident, expressive, and impactful. She played with a depth of emotion that resonated with audiences, creating moments of connection and inspiration. She understood that music was a language, a way to communicate feelings and experiences that words could not capture. Each performance was an opportunity to share a piece of herself with the world, to transform her journey into something meaningful and beautiful. The young pianist had learned that life, like music, was full of challenges, moments of doubt, and opportunities for growth. She had faced ridicule, overcome obstacles, and discovered the power of resilience and self-belief. Her journey was not just about mastering the piano, but about understanding herself, embracing her passion, and sharing her story through music. She realized that every note she played carried the weight of her experiences, the lessons she had learned, and the dedication she had invested in her craft. Looking back, the young pianist understood that her journey was a testament to the strength of the human spirit. She had faced adversity, yet she had remained true to herself and her music. She had transformed criticism and doubt into motivation, and in doing so, she had inspired others. Her journey continued, filled with new challenges, opportunities, and experiences, but she faced them with confidence, courage, and a deep love for music. She knew that as long as she remained dedicated, passionate, and authentic, her music would continue to touch hearts, inspire minds, and leave a lasting impact on the world.